what's an Anzellan? An Anzellan is this little guy. Babu Freak is the name of the character that you probably saw on Star Wars Last Jedi. If you saw that film, these three showed up in the Mandalorian later. They're droidsmiths and occasional squeezy toys for Baby Yoda, aka Grogu, if you're familiar with that show at all. Pretty fun scene, but man, look at that face. So much character. I just had to build one. So I'm making a life-size one. He's a droidsmith. I make robots. Makes sense, right? And this is how I'm going to do it. He might look familiar. He looks like somebody you might know. Maybe this guy right here. So yeah, it's my little mascot for my channel. He's made with EVA foam and foam clay. Pretty sturdy stuff. Takes a beating. And yeah, worked out pretty good. So I've done this a couple times now. So I think I wouldn't consider myself an expert. But as far as I know, I'm the only one doing it. So I guess that makes me the foremost expert. The idea is to sort of build up a little skeleton out of EVA foam. And once that's done, I just start adding the foam clay. Here I'm just kind of talking about the feet. But yeah, it's an EVA foam skeleton, and then I take globs of foam clay and I kind of put it on top. This one's going to stand on its own, just like mine, my little mascot figure and my Hinox that I made with the same technique. Their feet are kind of a weird shape, almost like hands with two thumbs. So they're pretty ideal for standing up straight. That's the shape of the foot. So I figure it should be pretty easy. It's not a super complicated figure. He's got some cool little details. The tool belt and the little hood and the mask that pulls down. It's kind of like a welding mask, or I don't know what you'd call it, but pretty techy. And the idea was originally to sculpt him out and maybe make this stuff out of leather. But I couldn't source any leather. I couldn't find anything that would really work. And I'm going to do this out of like the little headpiece out of maybe polystyrene. And then I guess the rest I'm really just kind of sculpting on. This video is primarily just me sculpting it to the best of my ability anyway. But yeah, I think the most complicated part with this guy is his face. And that's mainly because it's got so many little wrinkles and details. And of course, hair. I can't sculpt the hair. So that's probably coming from another source. No, I've got some gray whiskers on my beard. I'm going to probably requisition for the use of this little figure. But yeah, the wrinkles on the face are going to be the most problematic. And the reason for that is because the foam, or foam clay, I should say, when you're sculpting with it, it's very gooey and gummy. But as it dries like a foam, hence the name. Like a sort of a high density foam like you'd use for packing. The problem is that if you push a line into it, the line doesn't always stay, no matter how deep, and you really can't predict it too well either. So as it swells up, a lot of those lines and those details that you do kind of disappear. Like these little wrinkles in my fingers and thumbs will just sort of swell out of proportion or kind of... it's almost like if you took a wrinkly balloon and you put some air into it, all the wrinkles disappear. That's what the foam does. As it dries, it expands and it pushes the detail out that you put into it. So that makes it kind of a pain to work with. But, you know, obviously I'm able to work around that. You can see I sculpted hair and small details on the robot, the bot beast. So I don't think this is going to be too much trouble. You'll see as the video progresses how far I got with the face. some mistakes I made, and ultimately, I found the best way to approach it was really just to do it in layers. So basically, sculpt some details in, wait for them to dry, sculpt some more details in, wait for them to dry. I'll probably go into a little bit about sculpting the hood, but I mean, there really isn't much to it. So to get started, I take some EVA foam. This is probably about roughly 1/4 inch thick, maybe 3/16. I don't know. You take these pieces and you make a really rudimentary skeleton out of it. You can see part of the left leg on the side of the screen there that I've already started. And the idea is to make kind of a cylindrical body, or at least try to get the shape of the body down in small pieces, in increments. Here I'm just working on kind of like where his waistline is, belly area, whatever it's going to end up connecting to the legs. And I use a glue called Barge. It's a contact cement. You put a little piece of cement, almost like rubber cement. You put a little bit on one end of the EVA. You put another bit on the other end of the EVA. Give it some time to dry so it gets tacky. And then you just push those two pieces together and they hold in place. And that's the way the majority of this build goes until I start adding the foam clay on the outside. Stuff's pretty strong. I mean, it stands on its own. The idea is for this guy to stand on his own. So this one stands on his own just fine, even with the kind of weirdly shaped feet. It doesn't have to be really flat or anything. The details I was able to get into this were, I mean, they're obviously pretty decent. So if I can get something that small to stand, then, or even hold things, more or less, then it shouldn't be much of an issue for me to get the other one working. So some of the problems I'm going to run into just because of that is he's got big feet, but I still have to make sure it's balanced. If you look at the picture, you can see he's got fairly large forearms and hands, and he's using not gigantic tools, but I don't know what I'm going to make the tools out of. I want to be able to place the tools in his hands and take them out and not worry about the figure falling over. The other problem is the face, which I'm kind of showing here. He's got a lot of wrinkles. He's got a lot of lines, lots of character, you might say. The problem with that isn't my ability to sculpt it or how complex or difficult it will be to sculpt. It's the fact that once I get the foam clay on there, it doesn't like to hold detail. You can see the legs are there, the torso's there, the big fat feet are there. I have to trim those down a little bit. They're not going to be quite as weak once the rest of the foam clay's on. I got to kind of chop them up so they don't run into each other so much, because that becomes a problem. They just kind of flop around. But yeah, I've got the basic frame down, the head, the torso, and everything else just kind of comes together from there. Just a matter of getting all the little pieces and getting them together and having enough structure to be able to put the foam clay on it, which ends up it's actually a pretty easy process. You glue it, you get the kind of frame down, and then when you're ready to start putting on the foam clay, I mean, there's not enough gaps for it to interfere, then you don't run into any issues. The clothes I'm just going to sculpt, or I end up sculpting rather. I might add a few things that aren't sculpted. First being the visor. That's probably going to end up being made out of polystyrene or some other kit-bashed, bunch of materials. But once you get the body of this thing down, as you see I'm doing here, I'm just kind of building it up in sections. So here you see me adding and the way I add it, I don't glue this stuff on. If you notice, there's a little brush and a water bottle I wet the EVA just a little bit to give it something kind of tacky for the foam clay to latch onto, but even that to some degree isn't really necessary. Mostly just to smooth it out. But yeah, the stuff just sticks on, and then once it dries, it's on forever. It's not coming off till you cut it off. The thing is, if you take a balloon, it's and you haven't inflated it, it's full of wrinkles. You blow it up, and it loses all those lines, right? That deformation as it increases in size pushes any kind of lines out of it. And that's the way this clay works is, and I say clay loosely because it's really kind of just a putty, a gooey, boogery putty. It's almost like sculpting with slime. Once it dries, and you'll notice there'll be a few shots where it looks like he's got tons and tons of lines and detail. And like I said, this is done over several days. The next day, I take a look at it, and half those lines are gone. So what I ended up having to do is sculpt sections of it in a way that I would put detail down as more of a roadmap for the detail I would add over it later after it dried. So if you want to do like a wrinkle, you have to kind of press a line into the foam clay, obviously. But once it dried, you'd see almost only the faintest bit of what used to be that line. And you'd have to go back in and sculpt smaller and smaller parts over the top of that in order for it to maintain it. Yeah, what happened here, you can kind of tell in the middle of his belly, it didn't dry perfectly. The majority of the body dried, but there's a little point right almost in the middle of the screen where it's still squishy, kind of like this clay here. You can see there's a piece of EVA that I hadn't pulled out of it, still stuck in there. But yeah, right in the middle of his little belly button, it's still soft. It hasn't dried out yet because it was making contact with the water bottle. And because I guess that sealed it enough, it's almost still kind of gooey and fresh in the middle, like this stuff in my hands here. It, probably dried out in a few hours, so it wasn't that big a deal. So I start putting up some layering on the legs. At this point, I'm kind of working on a little bit more on the muscle tone. For his thighs, getting the shape of the leg, where the knee's going to be, where his calf muscles are. And also cutting out some pieces that are a little too square from that little skeletal subframe. You see me kind of looking at his belly and thinking, that might be a little too fat. And at some point, I give him a diet. I kind of cut his belly down, like shave it. It was a little, even after I put his chest on, the belly was just a little bit too Santa Claus looking, I mean, he kind of looked like he had one too many beers. But yeah, overall, I mean, it ended up really not being a problem. This stuff is so easy to work with. It's air dry, which does limit the amount of time you have to work with it, but it's not that bad. And also, if you really want to work with it, you have to let it cure all the way through before adding another layer, which is kind of a pain. But you don't have to worry about sticking it in an oven. There's no catalyst to mix. Just a little bit of water will work with it. You can glue things to it with crazy glue. I'm using that barge contact cement again here for adding the arms. Okay, fair warning. It's going to get a little graphic. So, as I mentioned, I wasn't a big fan of the way his eyes had turned out, and frankly, they were just a little too small. I'd colored them in, and I wasn't really liking it. So I had to dig out what I had put in. I think they were 2 small wooden beads. I needed to put bigger eyeballs in there, and that meant bigger holes. So I ended up just kind of gouging out his eyes, finding a couple of wooden beads that were the right size. This is kind of what he looks like at the end of that surgery. But yeah, I mean, it worked out pretty good. So at that point, I just started adding the fingers, the forearms. I was feeling pretty good about it. I felt like, yeah, I'm going to be able to finish this thing in a weekend. No big deal. You can see I put some wrinkles in his lips there. Those were gone by morning. Like I said, that stuff swells up pretty much like overnight to completely different size, shape, like I said, it's kind of tricky to work with. You really have to kind of get used to how much detail you can get away with that's not going to disappear the next day you come back to work on it. So at this point, I'm pretty confident with the way his face is looking. I've added a little bit more of a jawline. He's starting to look more like the character he's supposed to look like. And originally when I wanted to do this, and I had announced it sometime last year that I was going to make one, it was just a Babu Freak at that point. That's the name of the character from the movie. But let me tell you, I was pretty delighted when I saw him in The Mandalorian. Spoiler alert! I guess it's kind of late for that, but if you haven't seen them or seen those episodes, man, they're pretty interesting little characters. They really kind of steal the scene. I thought, well, if there's more than just one, this will be kind of like, it doesn't have to be Babu Freak. You can just be the guy I like it to be, which is my own little character, my own little personal Anzellan, my personal Droidsmith, right? My helper. So I'm like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. He's going to be cool. I'm going to do this little guy with a hood. And, I hadn't decided yet if I wanted him to be, I don't want him to look just like the guy that's in the photocopy. At this point, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make him look kind of cool and sort of my own thing, right? So I'm putting the wrinkles in the hood. Everything's going pretty good. I started having some sound issues and some camera issues while I'm filming this. But overall, he turned out pretty good. So there he is, kind of test fitting him for different types of little masks and things, trying to see if I can get him to stand up. And this is what he ends up looking like for the most part. I know it doesn't look like much. He doesn't have color. He doesn't have hair. I'm going to end up adding a few more details, but for the most part, he's done. I mean, there's some pretty basic stuff to take care of. Fixing the arms, making them a little more tone and more like the character in the images that I've got as reference. Couple things though, and I didn't notice this till the end, but I made a little mistake. What's wrong with this figure? But no, mainly the problem I figured out after the fact, and which I later went back to correct, and you'll see corrected in the next video. He's supposed to have 3 fingers and a thumb, and I've got 2 fingers and a thumb. I had to go back to my reference pictures and look at it, but yeah. So that's the end of the video. Sorry I don't have more. My phone died, but I promise you part 2's coming. I'm going to have a brand new video with paint and cool stuff everywhere. So like and subscribe and stay tuned for that. Keep an eye out for the fun stuff. And I will see you in the next one.